What is up, everyone, and welcome to my bar. My name is Nico. I go by COINTrick and cointricktwitch online, and today I'll be showing you guys how to make a Manhattan, but also how to build a bar starting with one drink. I'm going to show you all how to make a Manhattan, how to perfect that Manhattan for your specific tastes and for the tastes of your guests, how to iterate on that Manhattan with different ingredients but still keeping true to the Manhattan platform, and then also showing you what other kinds of classic cocktails are maybe one or two ingredients away from a Manhattan so that you can build up your collection from there. By the way, if you're more of an old-fashioned cocktail person, no worries. We've actually already posted a video on how to start your bar by mastering the old-fashioned first. The Manhattan has a golden ratio, well-respected traditional recipe that is 2 parts your whiskey, 1 part your sweet vermouth, and 2 dashes of your bitters. That's the classic recipe. That's where we're gonna start. I'll show you guys how to iterate from there for your specific tastes, or maybe for the tastes of your friends, family, your guests, if you're doing this for a living. So right here, we have rye whiskey, sweet vermouth, and bitters. So you're gonna want a martini glass or a coupe glass. Unfortunately, this is the closest thing that I have. This is more of like a margarita glass just because of the volume that it can hold, but it will serve just fine for this Manhattan. You're gonna need a stirring glass, a stirring rod or some kind of stirring device, a jigger to measure your ingredients in, and a strainer to strain your cocktail. And this should be everything that you need. Really quick point, if you don't have a stirring glass, don't freak out. You can use any other vessel, whatever is gonna work well for stirring something in. I happen to have these at my bar, so I'm using these. If you wanna go out and find this stuff, you can find this kind of stuff at like Target, Williams-Sonoma. You can order it on Amazon, obviously. There's tons of different places. I recommend checking out Bar Chemistry. He's a friend of mine. He's supplied my bar with a handful of different things too. There's one point that I make in pretty much every single one of these videos, and that is that every cocktail, or every ingredient of every cocktail that has ever existed, can only have 5 different roles. Some ingredients have 1 of these 5 roles, some of them have 2 or 3, they pull double duty, they fill multiple roles, but those 5 roles are liquor, lengthener, sweet, sour, and spice. In this recipe, in a Manhattan, even though there's only 3 ingredients, there is a little bit of all 5 of those roles being filled, which is why it is a really good cocktail with a very simple recipe. So the rye whiskey is obviously your liquor or your base. The lengthener will be the dilution that you add when you stir your drink. Your sweetener is your sweet vermouth. Your spice is going to be your Angostura aromatic bitters. Your sour, and this is going to sound counterintuitive because normally sour is something citrus, it's something very acidic, is going to be your vermouth. So this is one of those things that is pulling double duty. The quality of your sweet vermouth will normally make a bigger difference in your overall cocktail if you're making Manhattan than your choice of whiskey or your bitters. Normally. Another key point about sweet vermouth is that French sweet vermouth and Italian sweet vermouth, and those are the 2 main kinds. There are other kinds, but those 2 are going to be a little bit different. French sweet vermouth or red vermouth is a little bit drier. Italian sweet vermouth is a little bit sweeter. And if you're having trouble finding sweet vermouth in the store, you'll notice some of them say this one is Martini e Rossi Rosso vermouth. So sometimes sweet vermouth is just labeled red vermouth. With all that stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and whip up a cocktail for you guys. So 2 parts of your whiskey. We're using a rye whiskey here. So that's gonna be 2 ounces. And then we're gonna do 1 ounce of the sweet vermouth. That's your 2 to 1. Then we're gonna do 2 dashes of these bitters. Ice really quick. And stir it up. I can drink almost anything. Stir it up. It's in a cup. Drinking rainbow. There's not really a big mixological reason why you would want to do a long pour like that. It aerates your drink, which might help a few things. I am just doing that for style. You don't need to do that at home. Let's see how this tastes. It's like bitter, woodsy, astringent. I think the whiskey is doing a fine job. I'm kind of surprised that the typical bite or the spice of the rye isn't here. It's a fine cocktail. It's not great, so I'm gonna show you guys how to dial this in, how to make a few small adjustments to get it just right. But if you were using this recipe at a bar, if you were serving a guest, it would be fine. But we're not going for fine, right? We're trying to be great. I'm probably gonna end up mentioning this in pretty much every single one of these videos that I do, but maybe the most important part of getting this right is getting the dilution correct. Basically, the amount of water that melts from the ice and ends up in your drink overall, which you want. Ideal dilution is normally about 20% of your final volume, which is why, even though I had 2 ounces of this and 1 ounce of this and a couple of dashes, I have way more than 3 ounces of liquid here. Once you have that ideal dilution, then it's time to dial in the rest of the stuff. First thing pretty common that goes wrong with these drinks is that they are too strong, or that they have too much heat to them, meaning there's just too much alcohol. You could try remaking it with less liquor. You could try serving it chilled. You could try adding dilution. I don't normally say this, but my recommendation would actually be to try this again with a different bottle. This is only one of the things that might be wrong, but if it's a little bit too alcoholic, especially if you use something like a rye and you're getting too much of that bite, too much spice, you may want to try it with a bourbon or a wheated whiskey. It's going to be a little bit more even keel or even a little bit sweet. That's not the problem that I have with this drink though. I mentioned earlier, this drink has too much aroma, it's too pungent, it's too bitter, it's too funky. So that tells me that what's going wrong is somewhere between my sweet vermouth and my bitters, or maybe some combination of those two. So the next thing that ends up going awry, pun intended, with this is that it has to do with the sweetener, which in this case is your sweet vermouth. Sometimes if somebody tells you that it's too sweet, they won't use those exact words. They'll say that it's syrupy or sticky, or it's like candy. They'll use a bunch of other words. You have to be able to decode some of that to know that what they're talking about is the sweetener in your drink. The only real way to test and see if the sweet vermouth is the thing that is ruining your drink is to either try a different sweet vermouth or add dilution to see if it unpacks the drink a little bit more. I don't want you guys to go back to the store, so that's not going to be the first thing that I try when I modify this drink. Another quick note, if your drink is too sweet, in this specific instance, if you started with bourbon, you may want to swap for a rye, because bourbon is going to be made predominantly out of corn, which has a lot more sugar content than grains do. So bourbon typically has sweeter notes to it than rye whiskey. So the last thing that may not be perfect about your drink when you made it at home is that it's too bitter. People will say that it's too pungent, it's too smelly, stinky, it's too botanical, it's too herbaceous. Unfortunately, because you're only doing like 2 dashes of bitters, using less bitters isn't going to be helpful here. So you could try more sweetener, which in this case means more sweet vermouth. You could try fewer bitters, but I don't recommend that because it would be 1 dash of bitters instead of 2. You could add dilution. You can also technically add salt, which inhibits your body's ability to perceive bitter flavors. And I mean literally just a tiny, tiny little bit of salt will make a world of difference if it does feel too bitter. Another thing that could make your drink too bitter in this instance is that your sweet vermouth is too acidic, which happens because of just oxidation, because sweet vermouth is wine-based. So if oxygen gets in here over time, if you're not storing it in a cool place, you get tartaric acid, carbonic acid, malic acid. You get all of these other things that will lower your pH and make this more acidic. And those sour components eat away at the sweet components inside of your cocktail and force it to become more bitter. I'm gonna stick with the rye. I'm gonna swap out my sweet vermouth to sort of illustrate this point for you guys. So I'm gonna be using this, Cocchi Torino. Another Italian sweet vermouth. This one should be pretty different from the other vermouth that I have. Ooh. Yeah, you can tell already it's a lot more viscous than my Martini Erosi sweet vermouth. So many more like caramel and spice notes in there. Don't have to do a super long pour. Let's see how this tastes. Cheers. It like reminds me of like a chai masala. So there's like, I get like cardamom, lavender, like black tea, like bergamot. I get a lot of really botanical, and not so much, it's not overly bitter or anything like that. This is really good, actually. It's almost like a refreshing take on a Manhattan. Now we're gonna talk about subbing in similar ingredients that you might have at home. This is gonna be the first time that you're gonna need to go out and maybe get more stuff than you already have. For a Manhattan, traditionally you would want to use American whiskey, but there are other variations on a Manhattan that you can make with other non-American whiskeys as well. But for the purposes of this, if you started with rye, maybe try it with bourbon. If you started with bourbon, maybe try it with rye. For me, if I wanted to stick with 3 chords, I might try their Pinot Noir barrel finished bourbon. You could try a bunch of different things, just please stay within the whiskey family. For your bitters, sky's pretty much the limit. So I have these 2. I have Scrappy's orange bitters and I have Bitter Cube orange bitters. Whatever extra flavors you want to have in there, that's going to determine the bitters that you want. I happen to know that orange pairs really well with a Manhattan, so that's why I'm going for my orange bitters here. The last thing, and the most complicated one of these 3, is going to be finding a substitution for your vermouth. If you're really not a fan of the sweet vermouth that you have, and you don't want to go out and get a different one, or maybe you just don't like sweet vermouth in general, I would recommend that you try a kind of Amaro, or Amari, which would be the plural. So Amaro is a kind of liqueur that is made in Italy. It is a bitter liqueur. In fact, Amaro is the Italian word for bitter. Typically, we'll stick to a dark Amaro for a substitution in place of sweet vermouth, because you still need that turbidity and that spice to be there. So you wouldn't use something like Campari or Aperol. You would use, and these are my recommendations, you would use Averna Amaro, Montenegro Amaro, or Amaro Nonino, and there's plenty more, but I would start with those 3. If you do like your vermouth and you want some recommendations on different kinds of vermouth that you can get, the industry standard, which I don't actually have behind my bar, is going to be Carpana Antica. It is far and away and pretty much universally agreed upon to be the best sweet vermouth to use in these traditional style cocktails. And for that reason, there's also a premium on the bottle, which is why I don't have one. All right, let's set this aside. I'm gonna grab another coupe. Two ounces of this Pinot Noir barrel finished bourbon from 3 chord. One ounce Coqui Torino. And then I'm gonna do 1 ounce each of these orange bitters that I have. Oh, get a lot more of that orange scent to this one. I do look at the quality of the stream as I'm doing that long pour, just to see if it seems cloudy, if it seems clear. This one looks a little bit cloudy. See what that looks like. See, it's a little bit more frosted, cloudy. It's a little bit more opaque. We're gonna taste it, see how it turns out. Cheers. Actually, that's what I want my Manhattans to taste like when I go to a restaurant. Pretty simple ingredients. You guys should have access to the same stuff at your local stores, but proof of concept, follow these same steps. You'll get in the neighborhood of your own unique personal Manhattan that you can serve to your guests. Phase 4 is where we're going to talk about what different kinds of cocktails you can branch into if you've gotten these ingredients to make your Manhattan. So if you have whiskey and you have sweet vermouth and you have bitters, there's a handful of other kinds of cocktails that you have really easy access to if you buy 1 or 2 more things. If you try different kinds of sweeteners, so instead of sweet vermouth, if you try simple syrup or agave or maple syrup or something like that, then you have everything you need to make an old fashioned. And I mentioned this again, we have a video on how to build up that old fashioned. Another thing you can do is you can add a sweetener to this. So using whiskey, sweet vermouth, bitters, and a little bit of syrup, and what you will make if you decide to do that, is an improved whiskey cocktail. So if you go out and you get that simple syrup, or you make simple syrup at home, or you use a little bit of granulated sugar, you already have 2 more classic cocktails that you can make. You can go out and get dry vermouth, and if you split your sweet vermouth and dry vermouth, so you do 2 ounces of your whiskey, half an ounce of your sweet vermouth, and half an ounce of dry vermouth, and then 2 dashes of bitters, what you've made is a perfect Manhattan. Perfect is a bartending term that refers to any drink that normally has either sweet vermouth or dry vermouth, but instead splits the difference between those two. So a perfect Manhattan has equal parts dry vermouth and sweet vermouth. A perfect martini should, depending on who you ask, a perfect martini should have equal parts dry vermouth and sweet vermouth. If you do go out and get that dry vermouth, and you can get vodka and or gin, and now you can make a bunch of different kinds of martinis as well. The last step that I promised you guys at the beginning of this video, the extra credit, how to make your cocktails stand out, make your technique stand out from everyone else. I'm gonna just give you a few ideas of things that you can do to make your drinks stand out and really impress your guests. So the first thing is your garnish. So the traditional garnish for your Manhattan should be, ideally, an industry standard, you would want Luxardo Maraschino Marasca cherries that are soaked in their own liqueur. But basically, take your cherry, and then this is one of the things that your garnish pick is for. There we go. Put the cherry in your drink. You can skewer it as well. You want to take it one step further, you can make your own brandied cherries at home. So if you want to know how to do that, leave your comment down below. But for now, that's the first thing you should do. That's the original garnish that everyone should respect, is going to be that cherry. Another thing that some people will use a spritz of orange. If you want to take it a step further, peel that orange and use a torch to warm up the oils on the orange. And as you express those oils through the open flame, they'll actually spark. And it does make those oils more effervescent, so it's easier to smell. It will make your Manhattan smell like a fresh, ripe orange. The next thing that you might want to try and do at home are different kinds of infusions. What you see most commonly is an infusion of the whiskey or the vermouth. And what that means is that there is some other flavor, some other component added to those things to add some extra flavor that isn't normally there. So what I see a lot, and what we did a lot at my bar, is you would infuse your vermouth with tea, which is super easy. You can infuse it at room temperature. You don't need to heat it up. It's a lossless process. You do need to have a system for straining out the tea when you're done. What I see predominantly are things like chamomile. I see predominantly herbal teas, which you can find typically at your local craft coffee shop, or if you have a tea shop nearby, you can buy the tea there, add it to your vermouth, let it sit for 24 hours, even less maybe, and then strain it off, and then you have an infused vermouth that you can use for all of your drinks at home. What I see predominantly with whiskey, though, is fat washing. Because of the turbidity of the whiskey, it lends itself more to that kind of infusion. What fat washing is you add some kind of lipid, some sort of liquid fat to your liquor, and then over time, the fats, the lipids will settle to this slick at the top, which is kind of gross. It's kind of like having a grease slick. And if you can either slough that off the top or somehow siphon the liquid from the bottom, it will retain the scent and the flavor of those oils without becoming oily. So some common things that you would see this with would be like hazelnut oils, coconut oil washing, or the farthest craziest thing that I've seen is somebody doing a fat wash with bacon grease. The last thing that I'm going to cover is doing split base and split modifiers. So remember when I mentioned the perfect Manhattan, which has equal parts sweet vermouth and dry vermouth. That's a split modifier. You can do the same thing with your base. If I wanted to, I could do this again and use half of this Pinot Noir finished bourbon and half of the original rye and see, maybe I'll have the ideal ratio between these two drinks that I made. You can do split bases, you can do split modifiers, you can do this and half some kind of Amaro. And those are just a few of my recommendations for things that you can do to get your drinks to really become memorable and stand apart from what people might be able to get at a bar or what people might be able to make in their own homes. If you want to take that stuff upon yourself, absolutely go for it. Give it a shot. So, really quick review of everything that we covered, and these same things apply to all of your classic cocktails that you want to master. Step 1, find one simple, classic cocktail that you know you already enjoy and get all of the ingredients to make that at home. Step 2, modify that original recipe that you worked with for your specific taste and for the tastes of maybe your guests and friends and family. Step 3, go back out into the world and get some other ingredients that are in the same neighborhood to make the same style drink that you started with. And step 4 is branching out from that original concept, that original classic cocktail, to learn new cocktails by adding 1 or 2 ingredients that you don't already have behind your bar. And then step 5 is the extra credit, where you learn all of that extra stuff to really personalize your drink, make it stand out, make it memorable. Thank you guys for sticking around. Thanks for all of your help and support. Hopefully I've been helpful and supportive for you all as well, since that is why we do all of this stuff. If you learned something, don't forget to like and subscribe, comment what drinks you want to make at home, and I'll see you guys in the next video.